for illumined life to be birthed into form. I am the truth. I am the light. Illumined, beloved divine.
Hello there, everyone, and howdy. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting but also super special, very important topic, which is how well do we know the Christ by also knowing and understanding the Antichrist and its working. So, we have so much out there, especially in the Christian terminology and in the Holy Bible, and still so much is not so well interpreted for these times in which we're living now, which means that oftentimes Satan or the devil, which is very confusing for people, all these different names to be used, and then Lucifer, Moloch, Beelzebub, I don't know all these names, that sounds like Beatle names, and it's like we need to also know not just these theoretical principles, light versus dark, but we also need to understand the practical application of how this is playing out in our reality, and it has been playing out for thousands of years. Just right now, we've actually gotten this book also in another, this old antique bookstore. It's a book, Satan versus the Christ. I don't know what it's about, but it's an interesting topic indeed, because, a lot of people are getting their visions, their interpretations, and are dealing with these things. I'm more of a feeler. I feel and receive from Spirit directly. But often in this world, I had to explore some phenomena physically as a human as well, to understand practically what does this mean? How is this playing out within our matrix? Because the matrix is an alignment, and it works to support this system, right? And it's not just a system of control and enslavement, but it's also a system of feeding off something else that is born of this purity of life force. And I've talked about this before. So recently I actually watched this video that someone shared, and I'll tell you the title. I won't share a link because that's not what I do on my channel. There's a specific reason for that. And you can find this video. It's many slides that the person presents, and it's actually the most accurate description of the religion and doctrine they subscribe to, which is the occult mystery. It's being revealed of this Luciferian path and what they worship, what they actually believe in, not just as a lot of times we witness these acts, and I see a lot of people are saying, well, these people are sick, and it's beyond just seeing that. This person explained it to very much in detail how these acts go way back into the creation of humanity. So the video is called Lucifer and Luciferians, Masters of Deception by Chuck Swindoll. And the last name Swindoll is spelled S-W-I-N-D-O and 2 L's. So it's a very interesting video, and don't watch it before you go to bed, because I had a whole night of processing this, and my energy went into these streams, and it was a very intense night. But when I woke up, I felt called and inspired to talk about it some more, because if you will look at a video, and please find the courage and bravery to do so, because bravado is something that we're here to not just explore but develop as human beings, because as it was shared in this narrative, that we, the only way we can actually move beyond this is to wake up to what's actually happening, to understand the so-called enemy, because it's just not going to go away. And as you know, people giving this consent by oftentimes not knowing what's happening, and hence subscribing, not maybe fully consciously, but still through that deception and the art of deception, we somehow do so. And we're also financing through our own taxpayer money, a lot of these things that are going into these streams of life. And people don't even know what they're supporting and how deep these crimes go. They're crimes, but we can't just see them like that. So today I wanted to present this through the topic of the Christ and how the Christ sees this and how the Mother of Life sees this. So I'm just going to go briefly explaining the narrative because it's very deep, and I'm not going to go dissecting it here in this video because it's not the main importance of what I'm sharing this for, of why I'm doing this video. So if you all see the video and decide for yourself how deep this goes and how you relate to that, you'll see that, for me, the most fascinating fact was going back into the ancient history of Adam and Eve, and also Eve being involved with this fourth, it's called as fourth dimensional being or entity, that these beings believe they're ancestors of, they're the descendants, actually, right? Well, they're the ancestors, and those who live now and have been living, these incarnations, are the descendants of those beings and entities. So from my standpoint and from what I receive from that is, in combination with my own perspective that Spirit is always sharing me through the grand design and principles of life, is that they actually see life differently than those who are born within the Christ nature, which is pure love, compassion. And it's the state of what makes us human, and being able to cultivate divine life force through our human heart. And a human is a creature of love. When we're not of love, we're either one of these beings, right? Or we're somehow misled and we're being deceived into becoming aligned more and more with their essence, right? Which is devoid of that. So this also aligns with the book I shared with you. This is my word, the Alpha and Omega, the Gospel of Jesus Christ, as it's later reiterating another Gospel of Jesus that's more in-depth, describing the actuality of what was meant through that Gospel in his own teachings. Well, he lived in a physical incarnation, although his presence is working through. And I need to say that oftentimes people take him too much personally, but in this book, he doesn't just talk about himself as the embodiment of the Christ, but the universal or the cosmic Christ principle, which in his own words, it's just simply called the Christ of God. And I call it the cosmic Christ. It's just a matter of words, but it's the same essence that lives and dwells within each and every one of us. So because people don't know that this Christ is within, and this has been playing out for eons, right? This other form of life, because somehow it is a form of life, it's here, right? And it feeds off of those who are alive is through the breath of holy life itself, or Holy Spirit. It's still reenacting their beliefs and what they believe about life. So from their perspective, and like I will explain a little further on how this aligns with the book, God is also, this universal exuding of the primordial life force. But for them, because God exists outside of space and time, it has no say in what's happening in creation. So their main principle is be and do as you may, do as you will, which means that they have been developing this servitude to this entity, and how this entity has been having its own plan of constantly enslaving humanity and feeding off of humanity. And basically, as it's described, humanity became the cattle, right? Something to harvest. There's a lot of talk about harvesting, and harvesting is never a word you should consider in a good sentence. It never means anything good. Right? So the proper word when you're in alignment with the Christ is cultivation. No one is supposed to harvest anything from you. Not life force, not organs, not your energy, anything, right? When we cultivate this life force through the seed of the Christ, which lives in all of us, we're getting more aware that, this world is not just all beautiful and love and light. We're going to see through our own experience, which is what I personally had to go through and undergo myself, through some deep traumatic things, which I'll also talk about one day soon. And so when we realize this and have our personal experience, we understand that this, what the Bible calls the Satan or satanic forces, is actually a quite present living thing, and it's still ruling over the earth, although as in all main scriptures of life. It's always given this, there's always given this narrative that Satan has a limited time frame of its ruling over the planet and the people and enslaving them and feeding off of them, literally. So no one quite knows, right, this time frame and where we're now in terms of that end, right, that ending and those end days. But we're quite feeling that something amazing is happening because we're seeing more evidence of this coming to the surface, and people who are getting information together and they're sharing about it in a very literal way, like exposing it for what it is. And even them, right, those who follow these principles of these, there's also a satanic Bible, as you know. It's not even a Bible, it's just satanic worship material. And so even them, right, they're not being as secretive anymore. They're just putting things out in the open. But a lot of people are still asleep. So it feels like they're playing with humanity, almost like making a fool out of people because, you know, we're so downward obvious and you still can't see us because we made you fall asleep because of all the things and the atrocities they were doing with the human body. So the human bodies would become these acidic, closed off, energetically constantly filtered and hijacked beings who would eventually just be filtrated and exist at a very minimum level of life force, and even that would be sucked off and given to feed that system, which they envisioned to create. So I recently also watched another beautiful, interesting video material in which one of the Christian followers, this woman who's very skilled in deciphering symbology, you know, like these events that are happening at these games, you know, in inaugurations, these games they have, right? I don't want to mention the word. And they're always, through these symbols that they're receiving through their faith, kind of deciphering what the opposition is doing. And the woman was literally saying something that I've been talking about as well, that these forces, they're not self-creative. So they always mimic and try to copy what the Godhead, what divine does. And when we are basically creating this new cycle, they're also putting out in the symbology this birth. But their idea of birth is birthing things like the locust and like monsters, these things that go very deep and it's very dark in truth. But when you kind of bring it to the light, you're going to see it in a way that's, you know, you will start mocking it, you know, not from the perspective of not being aware and not paying much attention to it, like you're not taking it seriously, but in a way thinking, well, you know, I've seen through that. And it's just an abomination of source. So now comparing it to the book I mentioned, in that book, beloved Jesus specifically mentions how there is a being, a feminine being, who wanted to destroy the living universal principle and all the spirit forms, also resulting in all the souls being destroyed and all creation just returning back. So you can imagine that as someone being an entity that was created through source, just like anything was in the beginning, being so narcissistic, right? So egoic from that perspective, that the fall they created was an idea that they want to be now God of creation, not the God that exists outside of time and space. So in their image and likeness, they had their own version and idea how to create. So from all the levels of the fall, they've been creating this havoc, distortion, war, right? Warring, and they're gathering, like the Satan's supposed to gather its soldiers, which is basically just all the people who are doing this practice now and this ritual abuse and all these things that they're doing as performing this occult and dark magic and using the life force that basically humans are feeding into the system. They're just taking it, but they're using it for their own agendas. That's what they're doing because they have none of their own. So the main problem is that first, the people are not awake enough. They're not awake to their own divinity and the living cosmic Christ or the God of Christ principle within. Even if you believe in Jesus being the Savior, the Messiah, and that's still not enough. It is helpful because it paves the path for you and you're at least aligning with that which is sacred. But it's not the ultimate. It's not the ultimate ideal of the divine Godhead for a being to have any sort of adoration for another being outside of them, not recognizing the own living, the I am embodiment principle within. So this is where the hooks lie, and this is how they get people. because people, when not remembered, not living this divine remembrance state, they're not in their power. So they're using and abusing that, and also saying at the same time that when people give their conscious consent, even though these people are totally unconscious because they're not awake yet, they're basically, allowed to do what they do. So they have all these forms of ritual and what they're doing, and feeling, of course, completely entitled to it. And also from the perspective of them, they're seeing like they're in charge and they're winning. Although at this time, we already know the downfall has begun. It's starting. We can see it. It's playing out, albeit slow, but it is playing out. So going back to the book in which Jesus describes how this being had this idea of destroying creation and just starting off anew, and everything would just return to, the principle of nothingness. And so that being would somehow, it had an idea that they want to be in charge. And this is what created all the levels of the fall. So imagine if there is such a being birthed through the divine and being one of the first offspring, that started recreating life afterwards. So imagine you have all these beautiful principles of life, and one of them would say, but I'm not for this. I'm not participating in life. So it's a very complex history, the ancient cosmic history. It's not just galactic, it predates what we call galactic. And it's so complex that, you can't put it in one research or even in one lifetime. You have to have it as a soul, this memory. And you have to know that when one such a being fell, because there was, everything was a composite of oneness, of unity, then all forms of life kind of had to experience this fall and be a part of it. This is the tricky part, right? We would somehow think, well, we're not a part of it because we were not a direct descendant of that being. Well, the being created their own descendants, and they learn how to create, but not through life force, not through divine Trinity principles. And I've talked about that for quite a long time now. I hope I'm getting somehow across to you, those of you who are watching and eager to know more from the higher, spirit perspective. So still, right? Even though now on earth we see these beings who are aligning with that and somehow feeling they're a part of that divine heritage, and they're above humans and they're more than humans, although they have zero compassion, they have no love within. Everything that they inherit, even within their own children, in these families that are passed on from one to the other, their children are being ritualistically abused as well, because they're mind programming their own, so they would just be a part of this self, they're first self-enslaved, and because they're self-enslaved, they're enslaving others, and they're feeding off of them and the blood and everything, as you know. It's a part of what they believe, and it's a part of what they need, because their spirit form stopped existing in this pure state, like when you incarnate as a human and you're just living normal lives. They're more like what people call shapeshifters and all these things. And it's still not a proper perspective, the divine tells me, but somehow at this point we have no better. We call it like that because we read about it and we hear about it, but it's still not in actuality what fully describes the phenomena that became the birth of these creatures. So even though all of this is playing out, and they're playing out their version, and in their version they are the offspring of the descendants of, when we had the story of the first children of Adam and Eve, and we have the Cain and Abel, and Cain was the one who killed Abel. Well, it's all in that video. I'm not going to go into that. It's beautifully described there. So they believe they're these descendants, and they're maintaining this vicious and dark cycle of death over life. And when you look at it from the perspective of what Jesus described in that book, that this being wanted to annihilate creation and to start over, but not through God, but their own, malicious nature, that they're beyond and above. They did not want to be a part of divine creation and following divine principles. They wanted to live as they would will, right? And so this brought forth this abomination of life in creation. And because they believe, well, the divine cannot do anything because it's simply a source that never intermingles, that never does anything, it just exists out of time and space. So we're free, we can do whatever we want. And it's not exactly like that. And that, in a way, that belief will be their downfall, because it's not in actuality exactly like they believe as well. But they believe it for a reason, and they're having that experience. So what they're doing, right, is what I'm seeing it through spirit is when you're feeding off of another life form, it's like you would be, it's like making fun, not just making fun of God, but it's an abomination of life. Like you're mocking life, the existence of life. So you would feed off of life and you keep on killing life to take value from it, just to show, look, life has zero value. It's just this body. It means nothing. I can kill it in a war. I can totally enslave it through, mind control. I can totally do this and that with vibrational weaponry. Look how vulnerable it is, this body, and it has no knowledge of the occult. That's somehow their perspective, and they're seeing humans as Gentiles and weak and vulnerable and basically a source of food. If you are a conscious, cosmic Christ awakened human, of course, that you're beyond that, being eaten or, devoured in any kind of way. But still you're being persecuted, like it occurred through me in this transgression, which I'll share more in another time and space. And it's not like at any time we're out of it, because any soul that is serving the plan for all that has fallen to return to the core, the origin, the principle of life and life-giving, basically, when you're assisting in these worlds of creation, when this is still playing out at the most maximum point of the potential of darkness eating this life, right? Wanting to run over it, always be in charge and control on top of it, and basically mocking life by eating life forms while they're still alive, torturing them. And so this is like mocking God and saying, look, see, you've created this, and this is what I do to your creation. This is basically the sickest part of this, is to subtract yourself from this beautiful love just because you have this stubborn, rebellious nature, because you don't want to be a part of divine law. And because of all this, you create all this nonsense and havoc. Imagine how this feels at the higher echelons levels in divine creation of life. It's terrible. But let me tell you one other thing. What we see now happening on earth with all of this, and still I recommend you to watch the video, just not before going to bed. It's no imagery, it's just PowerPoint presentation, but it's still powerful, because the mind is absorbing all that information in, and we are still gentle, and we feel, and we're compassionate beings. That's what does affect us. So from the higher perspective, what we're witnessing now on earth, and is gross and is difficult to digest, and it's something that humanity, once it's fully out there at a specific point in time, will have to digest, integrate, and heal from. It's a deep wound. But that wound goes all the way back to that first fragmentation, which began with the original fall, with the original separation, which I've talked about for so many times already, right? And the reason why it's so difficult to heal that also, right? One is because we're being so deeply fooled that we can't remember who we truly are. Then we can't remember what the enemy, at this point on earth, yes, it's an enemy. It's an enemy to life. And we can see what they're doing. So we're participating in many ways and even financing these things, and it's very much explained in this video how that happens. And the third point of why it's so difficult is, yes, because we still can't hold compassion at higher states of being, because we're not yet, like humanity is not yet developed to imagine having such a deep compassion that you also feel it for them. Because in most cases, when I see people talking about that, they're calling them sick, perverted, sicko, psychopaths, all these things. Yes? But imagine existing for eons, being a progeny of nothing but death program, of killing, death over life, sucking life out of life, feeding off of that life, and torturing your own so they could follow your legacy. And not just worshiping what they worship, the being, the entity they worship, but also, sacrificing the life to give it, bring it up to them, saying, look, this is what we do because this is what you ask of us. And imagine the level of fall in these beings. And it's difficult, right, to recognize that these beings also once began as an offspring of something that was divine. We can't. We literally have the split reality here in our mind, and we go, well, they must not come from source. It must come from another source. But even when the first being, the first entity has fallen, they could not come into creation otherwise but source, but God. Right? So because of that, because their origin, no matter their fall, still came from the first primordial life design. This is what, like I said, this is what is in a way their own entrapment, because they failed to realize that the fall happened afterwards. Life did not begin with the fall. So this is that spark still within them. And we can't think of the fact that every darkest being still has that spark. Perhaps not at the level we see it manifest. But somewhere in that first encoding, there is a remnant of that. And it remains that. So whatever is happening, that part is there dwelling in their own source aspect, which once brought forth that creation of life. So it's very complex. Humans still don't understand. I've seen a lot of interesting videos when people can go very deep in deciphering these things, and they're very much on point what's happening. But when it comes to the bigger picture and the love and the compassion and the mother's healing, the mother's heart, I feel I need to talk about it, because most humans are still incapable of holding that amount of compassion, which is the third level of waking up that gets this done within ourselves first at the core level. So first is awakening to a true power that we were created through this beautiful God self, the Christ in us, and every single being and every single soul is the living life principle that is the eternal life. And we all have it because we all are it. Second is waking up to that which has fallen, the fallen aspect. We also have to wake up to the fallen aspect. We have to wake up to those that are practicing embedding this fallen aspect into our reality, but also seeing where we're still subscribing to that. Because what, in Bible it's called the sin, is not automatically, sinful that we think. We're not just some sinners, because this is where the Christians also are being deceived, that we're just these sinners, we're nothing, it's just Jesus as the Messiah and God, there's nothing else. There's many types of Christians. Even Christians have their development and evolution. And that's kind of the beginning Christian level, which you still just see life in a limited way. And it's still an indoctrination, and they're the ones who are benefiting from it. Right? So you have to also wake up to the inner fallen nature that has been through deception incepted in you. Because it's been happening through this progeny for eons of time and for thousands of years. So that fallen nature is not just you having a nature to be angry, have this rage or kill even. It can be as a subtle thing as never letting yourself to live a fully authentic life and return to love. It can be something where you're living in a lifeless state and condition, or you're, like I've mentioned in the previous video, you're in a marriage or in your circumstance that is not really mimicking, reflecting that Christ which you feel within. It's just not. You're not worshiping your own self enough. You're not loving your own self enough to value that the Christ and the Mother of Divine, they want nothing but your joy and freedom and happiness to be the Christ in the human form and to experience that love. And every time we kind of engage with life in a lifeless way, we're also not worshiping life, because that's the only thing truly to worship is life. That's what God is. And so in that sense, we're also constantly giving the power away. And you might come home every day feeling depleted and like you're just serving the matrix and giving yourself to that and to slaving the system and slaving your ass off, but still not willing to do even a tiny, tiny change ahead to return to the path of love and the life that Divine Mother envisioned for you, but you just haven't had the courage to claim it yet. All these things, right, are important. And that's the second part, right? Recognizing these subtleties where the hidden enemy within is recognized just as the enemy we see outside of us. But we always have to do inner work. How, right? By applying the inner laws and principles first, because then we see that reflected in the outside world. So, yes, waking up to the Antichrist just as much as we in the first point we knew the Christ. And the trinity of that is, like I said, this higher state of compassion when we connect the two, when we connect both. So cosmic Christ can take up all of this that has fallen and just bring it back to love. And this is what the mother does. This is the aspect of source that is she, that is the feminine aspect of source, the life-giving aspect of source. And this is the aspect that they negate to this day, and why they so eagerly put it out of the equation and keep denying it, because somehow by their belief that God is only this outside of time and space source, nothing but this pure light that started it all, but they're not in creation. And if they keep denying this feminine aspect of life, that God is also in all of his creation, that's how, ignorant they actually are. They're foolish in that belief, in that conviction, and that will get them at the end. Because source is not just outside of his creation. Remember what I've shared with you before, the Trinity of life, the Trinity of source. God as the I am self, the being, the creator, God as his creation or her creation. And that third aspect, that which experiences life in creation, the aspect of life thriving, throbbing, pulsating with this beautiful love of life. And so that third aspect, that deep compassion for all life, even that which we call the Antichrist, by seeing it from the higher perspective, is how the mother heals. And I will tell you straightforwardly, not many people on the planet have that amount of love. Why would I love Lucifer? No. I don't even know if it exists. It's just some mentioned, in some books he's mentioned as that's just the planet Venus. Well, it's a very complex topic. Venus comes in alignment as well, and how they worship, and the 5-pointed pentagram, but it's in reverse. I see a lot of these explanations are not as black and white. This is why the first step is knowing yourself as source, because through source you will get the higher knowledge automatically, organically, as the more you grow into God within yourself. Second part, with that, you will get all knowledge, how the split happened. And you will get the knowledge how to heal yourself. And the third, healing at the holistic whole level of all life, is where this higher mother's love comes through and comes forth. And this is that part that does not judge. Even when we think, oh, but this is an abomination of life. Yes. But only God that is all life, not just an aspect of it that is me, that is you, that some of us and all of us is one. Only God sees the whole picture. But if we move into that trust, right, then we will feel that there's one part specifically that we are bringing forth by anchoring this love as individuals. So it's not that completely passive surrender, well, God has it all in charge. But it is yes, and also we're also in charge. So all these three aspects I gave you today are part of this healing. Watch that video, which I recommended, then watch maybe my video again if you have some extra time, which I really do recommend, and see how the higher understanding of these things will always balance out that which wants to be superseded as the only reality. Because even that, no matter how well researched we are, it doesn't end with this. Remember, there is always more. We're always learning more about this. How is this coming into union? And at this point, it looks very extremely dualistic, I know, but this is where we are now. However, at the spirit level, union has already started. I've shared last year, or maybe even a little before that at the spirit level, Illumined Union has already begun. We are already in the phase of the return. We're no longer in the phase of coming apart, but we, existing in these third density forms in this, what we call the third dimension, we're not feeling it yet. But if we're very subtle, if we give the divine silence, let it speak through us, we will hear these things, and this is how we feel. And usually, right, when the return starts happening, that's when it crushes a wave of, everything that wave pulls everything to the shore. This is what's happening now. Along with that salvation comes so much revelation. This is why it was called in the Bible revelation. That's what's happening now. So the more people wake up to the fact how they were deceived, and with their own consent feeding this narrative and giving, allowing, right, giving permission, we have to wake up more. And because we know that most people on earth don't, they're still sleeping, they're still deeply entrenched in this, That's why we're doing this work at the level of those who can do the work, who have the eyes and hearts to see, who can not just speak the words, like, preaching it, but we know what is the most important essential component, which is love. And that love is the love of the mother. The mother does not just love the Christ. The mother loves all forms, even that which at the beginning separated itself from being in the Christ. That aspect that yelled out saying, no, but I want this instead. I want power instead. I don't want to be the Christ. I want to be powerful. And the mother allowed. And because God is in all creation, right? All its creations became God, which means they had the right to choose an experience. And right now we feel, well, this is being done in alignment perhaps with them, but it's done against the will of those who are innocent. Well, still, they're giving their consent because they've been deceived and manipulated. So hence the workings of the Christ to wake up as many souls as we can at this time, to spread this immense love, because this love is that which can wake up the sleepers. It's not information. Information does not always catch those who are at the level of really being down at the bottom of the sink. And perhaps in this lifetime they won't get there. But the seed is being planted. Remember that always. And so the workings of the mother are very subtle. And she will first influence those children that do know, and then can pass on not just the word, but the emanation, the exuding of that love. And this is how we operate here in this realm. Whether it's just one or two or maybe three people who will understand what I'm talking about in this video, that will feel this sharing, that it will start to ripple out through their own heart. And it won't end with them. It will touch life. And this is how the continuation of life occurs. So what they're doing is they're using forms and means of control to get across not just their beliefs, but their direct convictions of reality as they believe it to be. But we, those who are within the Christ, who've never lost, never fallen, but we were also in the experience of the fall, see? We know how to serve life by constantly moving life within us through love. And that's something we cannot do with control, and we don't. But we do it with this higher state of compassion. So even though it's necessary for us to have those wake-up calls and sometimes watch those kind of materials to wake up even more, to have more information of the practical implication of how this is happening in our world. But still, we also, each time we need to take up that information and bring it to the Christ level so that Christ can illuminate through it, so that we don't get stuck with the, oh my God, what's happening, right? Prayer in action. Praying to the divine to know better, to get information, but to illuminate that information, and to see always the higher perspective through love. So I'll end it here. Watch the video in any way if you can, and don't forget to bring everything back to love, and don't be afraid of anything, okay? Because that's our source of power, this fearless bravado of love. And thank you again for watching, for staying tuned, and as always, so much love is in power. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.